Minamanagia First Nations. So please give a round of applause to Trent. Warm welcome to him. And he's going to introduce our guest speaker for this evening.
Thanks, Alan. Just like to welcome everyone to UNB's Peace and Friendship Treaty Days. It's a pleasure having all of you here today, visiting our campus and coming to our symposium. I'd like to thank the speakers today. Very engaging, very interesting, important talks that happened today about our peace and friendship treaties. I know I've learned lots and through the very inspiring speeches. So, but I've been given the honor to introduce our public lecture speaker, Stephen Kakfwi. So at this time, I'd like to introduce him. During his professional career, Stephen Kakfwi has been and continues to be instrumental in advancing the Aboriginal land and self-government rights of the Northwest Territories, Dene, Métis, and Inuit. He has had a distinguished career in public government promoting Northwest Territories' political, constitutional, and economic development in the North, within Canada and internationally. He is the former Premier of the Northwest Territories from 1999 to 2003 and President of the Dene Nation from 1983 to 1987. Mr. Kakfwi's current focus is on achieving a balanced approach to conservation and development of the North's resources and promoting community development in Northwest Territories Aboriginal settlements. He is also the President and CEO of Canadians for a New Partnership. So ladies and gentlemen, please help me with introducing Mr. Stephen Kakfwi.
Thank you. I'm sorry you're all late. Well, it's always a great way to start off, especially at the end of the day, with a little bit of humor. It's not something I'm good at. I'm trying to acquire it. And I think I got a little bit of it. I said I would try to do that before I'm 65, and I got 2 weeks left. So again, thank you to the organizers, to all of you who have been attending this conference. I attended a couple of the presentations so far. I've been on the road for 3 weeks now, and I'm coming down with a cold, so I don't know if I'm going to make it home. It's more about whether I can get on a plane and survive the ascent and descent, the change in pressure. But this is what I do from time to time through my life. I want to tell you some stories. I'm not an academic. I don't lean towards lectures, but I can tell stories, and the stories I'll tell are about things I've done, things I've been a part of, which I know. I like to share those. We will talk about treaties and reconciliation. How many of you have been to residential school? How many of you are children of the survivors of residential school? Okay, thank you. I'm going to talk about the importance of education. I want to talk about the residential schools, my own experience in it, and about forgiveness. I'm going to talk about the past, the present, and the future. I'm going to talk about my parents, myself, my children, my grandchildren. And I'm going to try to talk about this organization that I started with a group of friends and associates a few years ago called Canadians for a New Partnership. And I'm going to mention briefly an organization right in Yellowknife, started by a group of young people, including my children, called Denenaho, which means the Dene way. And I'm going to remind you that things are not static out there, that there is movement. And it is different from the way it was in the past. So first of all, as for myself, I spent the first 5 years of my life in the bush, on the land. And it's a very different life, and probably I'm the last generation that can say that. I was born out on the land and lived literally on the fish and the caribou and the moose, the rabbits and the spruce grouse, the ducks, the beaver, the muskrat, the berries, out on the land, first 5 years. I also spent almost 8 years in residential school. And like many of my people, I went through some very, very difficult experiences. At the age of 9, I went to residential school and I was sexually abused there. Pedophiles were attracted to the institutions like flies. A local bank manager said he loved and wanted to serve God so much that he quit his job so he could supervise children. That must have been a horrific loss in pay. But that's what he did, so he could have access to the children like myself. There was a nun there that beat me. Today I can barely walk 2-3 blocks because that winter that I spent with her, I went without winter boots, without winter shoes. It was just a pair of rubber boots in Inuvik, which is pretty far up north. And I guess there was extensive damage, tissue damage or nerve damage, because I'm getting more and more crippled. Everything else works fine. You know, I like to think my memory is good, my mind is clear, hands are good, but my feet are giving out on me. I have gone through some very, very difficult times as a child in residential school. And when I came out of it at the age of 18, I was in a rage at the church and the government. I was in a rage at my father, my mother, and I was alienated from my own people, from my own family, from my brothers and sisters, because I didn't grow up with them. My father died in 1975, just a couple of years after I came out of residential school. And I was still raging when he died. And in 1998, I had a dream of him. He came in a dream. Or I came, I could see somebody on a really rainy day out in a field, somebody out there in the mist by himself. So I went out to see what I could do to help, because this person looked alone and lost and cold. And when I got there and I turned, that person around was my father. And I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "This is where you put me." The difficulties that we went through residential school stays with us. My father, I did not know, also went to residential school. My mother, who is 94 now, told us just 10 years ago that she, in fact, also went for over 10 years. I did not know that about my parents. So I raged against my father, and I became like him. He also had an incredible temper. There was rage and violence and alcoholism in my family. And that's how I became. I hated the way they were. I detested it and despised it. But I became like that as well. I hated the nun that beat me and suffered me so much. And I thought, how could somebody be so cold and heartless and mean? And I became like her as well, unfeeling, heartless. So you realize that you become a product of the people that you encounter in your lifetime. And it spells out in really clear terms why it's so important to have a family, to have a home, to be raised by your own parents, to have a home, somebody that tells you what a family dinner is, somebody that tells you what it's like to be tucked in, to feel safe, to be in a house with the rest of your brothers and sisters. Those are not things that thousands of us grew up with. Those are not the things that are part of who I am. So when I got married in 1981, it was my wife who raised the children because I didn't know what to do. And I learned the little children's songs and the stories at the same time as my children. So I didn't have that. I had no idea what beautiful fairy tales and songs that millions of children around the world had to learn. So I was an apprentice under my wife. She showed me how to do things. And a very telling thing was when we built our first home. I said, well, I want to have a say in what kind of furniture and the decor of the house. So she said, well, what would you like? I said, I would like to have linoleum in all the rooms. It's easy to clean. And the moment I said that, I realized that's what I grew up with. That's what I grew up with. One of the things that I learned as a Dene person is I learned the songs, the drum songs, and the legends as a young child. And that I lost all that, including my language, during the almost 8 years I was away. But I was blessed with support from many elders who said, you give great speeches in English, translate yourself. And so I learned my language because I had no choice. It was part of my job, and it came back because I knew it as a child, and I learned the language again. I lost a childhood like everyone else that went through residential school. You grow up with a feeling that there's just a great big hole inside you, and you can never figure out why is it. Why is it when families get together and there's children around, and you just feel like there's something missing? There's just a great big emptiness. And you think, well, maybe I'm just homesick. Maybe I'm just missing the good old days. But you slowly realize that you don't have that. You don't have what other people have, this memory of being a child and being with your mother and your parents and your brothers and sisters. That was the past. Today, and through my political career, I worked very hard, and I managed to be a part of a great many things. I was part of the division of the Northwest Territories, worked with the Inuit, other leaders to get agreement on a border that we negotiated. It wasn't academics or politicians or government officials. It was the Inuit hunters, elders from the communities with the Dene elders and Métis elders, many of them who were unilingual. We sat down and mapped out the longest negotiated border in the world. You know, you think about it today and you think it is an amazing piece of work for a people like Inuit and Dene to have worked together to create a new jurisdiction, set up a government at a day when the media and our critics are always saying, First Nations, they don't know how to handle money. They can't run anything. They steal money, they misappropriate money, they mismanage money. And I say, look at the Northwest Territories. That government is over 50% Indigenous. It runs itself very well. Of course, since I was a premier, of course it runs very well. The government of Nunavut is a public government that the Inuit said, you know, that'll work for us, we'll use it for now. Maybe someday in the future they will negotiate a unique form of government. But for now, we're saying, we'll use that. Take it, it's a tool. That's all government is, it's just a tool. We can use it, we can make it work, so. I look for concrete examples of things that we've done that could be used in other parts of this country. Because I think as Canadians, as Indigenous people, as Métis, First Nations, we do not work together the way we can and the way we should. We do not share the stories of our people enough. I'll give you an example. When Chief Teresa Spence got so frustrated with the lack of action on the chronic housing situation in her reserve, she went on a fast. The government ignored her, refused to budge. She fasted for a month. A few months later on national TV, there was the answer. 5 prefabricated houses being shipped to Antowapiskat. I think it was 5. I was sitting in my house in Yellowknife, and you know, it just about broke my heart. Because I thought, why is it that we almost act like we don't live in the same country? In 1981, in one of the most remote communities in northern Canada, in my hometown of Fort Good Hope, we rejected social housing. And we rejected prefabricated houses. And we said, give us the money and we'll build the houses ourselves. And the government gave it to us and they said, we know you're going to mess it up. You can't do it. You can't handle money. You have no expertise, but we're going to give it to you anyway. We took the money. We selected 7 trappers, 5 of them who were unilingual, and they managed the money, $700,000. Amongst themselves, they designed the size of houses according to the family sizes they had. We hired a contractor and a carpenter who helped design the houses. We harvest the logs, and we finished the 7 houses. And our history has been since to do that in all the communities. And why is it that in Ontario, it's almost like they never heard of it? So it came to me that we need to visit each other as First Nations people, as Indigenous people too, to tell each other the stories about what works and doesn't work. You know, who invented snowshoes? Was it the Dene or the Mi'kmaq? Was it the Mohawk? Was it the Ojibwe? Was it the Cree? We don't know, but we all use it. You know, all the kind of the canoes and the paddles and all the things that we use for ourselves, toboggans. Who created that? I mean, we didn't all invent it at the same time. But we use it, we share that, we know what works and what doesn't work, what is useful to us. And we need to rebuild that tradition on a national level. And that's what Canadians for a New Partnership is about. When Chief Teresa Spence started her fast, I know what it's like to be hungry. Even as a child, I remember what it's like when you don't get the moose, you don't get the caribou, and you've been eating spruce grass for a week. You know what it's like. You know, you hear it in the voice of your father and the other hunters. And when you have nothing but fish for a week, you remember that. So I thought Chief Teresa Spence is going to, she probably won't last 2 weeks. But then I was a little bit relieved to hear she was going to live on fish broth. You could live on that forever. But I wanted to give her support, so I called Joe Clark, and Joe Clark answered the phone. First ring. So I talked to him and I said, you know, I'm in Yellowknife, and I figured out if I bought a ticket to go down and see her, it would cost me $3,500. It was before Christmas. So I said, could you go and see her? Just let her know there's people worried about her and she cannot die. It will be a disaster for this country. So Mr. Clark said, I'll do that. So just on a whim, I thought, I'll call Paul Martin. So I called his office and left a message with the secretary, and a couple hours later he called back. So I asked him the same thing, and he said, that's no problem. He said, I'll be there in a few days. Got to go to Ottawa anyway, so I'll go see her. So then I knew, you know, I was onto something. So it's one of those kind of magic moments, you would say. So just out of the blue, I thought, I know Paul Ukalik is a former premier of Nunavut. I know his sister lives in Ottawa, and she's a good friend of my wife. My wife, by the way, is Marie Wilson, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So I asked her for the phone number, and I called her, Lucy. And Lucy answered, and she said, this is amazing. She said, he's just walking in through the door. He's been on holidays down in the States for 2 weeks. So then you know it's, you know, this is kind of a time for this idea. So he went to see her as well. And out of this conversation, then I went crazy with the phone, which I hardly ever call people because I'm by nature an introvert. So I called Phil Fontaine, Ovid Mercurdy, Mary Simon from the Inuit, Sheila Watt Cloche. And I got really bold and I called Sheila Fraser. And a few others, you know, and now we're all have come together. Michael Jean's, one of us, John Kimball, we just got together and said, we are as diverse as this country is. We're spread out all over the country, but we all share something in common, which is we want this country to be a good country for all of us. And we want to make relations between the Indigenous people and the rest of Canada better. It can be better, and we think we know how we could do that. And so we called a meeting in March, and we all came. And that's how it came. So Canadians for a New Partnership is simply a group of prominent and formerly prominent Canadians with a contingent of young leaders who have agreed to work together to find specific things that we can do that will make this country better, that will improve the relationship between Indigenous people and Canadians across this country, that we would collectively use our speaking opportunities to talk about the positive examples, the positive stories about what great achievers, what great accomplishments and precedents and basic case scenarios we want to share with the rest of Canada. That's what it's about. Canadians for a New Partnership. So because I came up with the idea and I talked everybody into it, they said, well, you have to be our CEO and president. So that explains why I've been on the road for 3 weeks, and I've got 2 to go. The last time I did anything like this was during the 70s, when there was a proposal to build a massive gas pipeline from Alaska through the northern Yukon down the heart of the Northwest Territories to Alberta and to the United States. And there was a federal inquiry called the Berger Inquiry. In 1975, I was 23 years old, 24 years old, just out of school. I think I had one job before I got involved with that. And the elders from my community were the ones that said, we want you to speak and be our leader because we're facing something that is very, very dangerous for all of us. I couldn't speak. I was incredibly shy. But I spent weeks traveling across Canada, town to town, church to church, media interview after media interview, till I had no idea what I was saying. I had no idea where I was. And I kind of felt like that yesterday. I was thinking, my God, where am I? I have no idea where I was. And I realized this is what I do. I pretend I'm retired, but it's not the case. And a year ago, I went home to my hometown, and they asked me to help with the self-government negotiations. And we have big problems. We don't have trained people. We don't have educated people. We have problems with alcohol and the incredible impact of residential schools. We're very dysfunctional people. But they all agreed on 3 things. The easy part about self-government is negotiating the structure. That's easy. You know, I said, I could design you a Cadillac model of self-government. But if you don't know how to drive it, and you're not sober, and you're yelling at people in the back seat and mad at everybody on the road, it's going to be a disaster. And the community said, okay, let's do it. Let's build it as a 3-prong approach. We want to train our people. We want to negotiate the structure. and we want to look at capacity along with the training, which means we have to be healthy, we have to be sober, we have to build strong communities and families. And that we need to relearn how to get along, how to sit in a meeting without 2 or 3 people dominating the whole thing, where the women are allowed to speak, where everybody that is in the community is asked to say something, even if it's just their name, and thank you, I'm just here to listen. And an amazing thing happened in one of the meetings where an elder who is about 75 years old, never spoke at a meeting in his life, and he got up and that's what he said. He said, but I want to say something because Steve has asked me, and he wants all of us to say something. And what he said was profound for me. He said, I grew up on a land we had to work to get our water, to get our food, to get our shelter, to keep ourselves warm. We work hard, very, very hard. He said, now we all live in town and I don't see that. He said, I don't see young people working hard. You know, out of 2 days of meetings, like for me, that was one of the things that I took away from it. That the message to our young people is that just because we have electricity and heated houses and roads and trucks, that doesn't mean we can just sit around on our rear ends and have the easy life and wait for welfare and wait for jobs to come along, you know. We have to work just as hard. We know how to do it. That's part of our culture. That was how we were raised. That's how our grandparents were. And we have to sort of recapture that. And it's a constant reminder to me because I'm under this illusion. Hey, I'm just about 65. I deserve a break. I deserve to retire. Well, that elder's message for me was an affirmation that I'm not crazy. That all of us, it's up to every one of us. When we talk about reconciliation, who are we talking about? Are we talking about everybody in Manitoba, British Columbia, everywhere but here? I think we're talking about ourselves, and that's what I'm talking about. Reconciliation is very, very hard because it took me over 15 years to forgive that nun that was so brutal with me. And I did it in public on national television. And I thought, if I say it, and I'm not even sure I mean it, but if I say it, then I have to honor that. That I have to work every day to remember this nun was somebody's daughter. She was a baby. She was born of a woman who must have loved her. She must have had a father. So she became human. That's how I did it. So whatever happened to her, she wasn't born like that. So forgiveness was difficult. And I could not run around and say, okay, well, I'll have to forgive, having done that myself. There is a huge streak of anger in me and just about everybody that I grew up with, that I went to school with. We all have it. I listened to the stories of 3 Inuit men who were sent to Ottawa as an experiment in the 60s and 70s to see if they could be educated and turn into white people. And every one of them said there's rage and incredible anger in every one of them. One is a recluse, that won't have anything to do with anybody. The other one is a recurring alcoholic. And the other one just sullen, far away from his people as he can. But what I liked about it, I think there's still hope. There's still hope to do it. And I say there's hope because we cannot give up on our own people. You know, there's movement. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has created movement. Our chiefs, our leaders have created movement. More and more Canadians are aware of who we are. And if we can implement the recommendation that across every province and territory in Canada, there is a mandatory study of the culture and history of Indigenous people in the curriculum, kindergarten to grade 12, in every province and territory across this country. That in a few years, we're going to be graduating thousands of young people. And every one of them is going to know more than the total sum of what their parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles combined knew about the Indigenous people. That's how profound it's going to be. You heard Bob Ray talking about that. You heard the judge from Saskatchewan, Arnott, talk about that. And that is a specific focus that Canadians for a New Partnership has picked up on. That we're saying the Paul Martin, Joe Clark, Steve Kakfwi, Ovid Mercredi, Phil Fontaine, Mary Simon team can open the door to premiers like nobody else can. That we will use our collective profile and presence to ask to meet every premier across this country, every cabinet minister, every minister of education, the teachers' federations and unions, to say, we support this, we encourage you to do it. There's movement because a year and a half ago, who would think that the first province to publicly commit to change the curriculum in all the public schools in its jurisdiction, kindergarten to grade 12, to the study of the history and culture of Indigenous people, including the history of residential schools, would be the province of Alberta. But they did. And it's been reaffirmed by the successive governments since then. I think Sid Hancock was the premier who made that announcement, followed by premier for a moment, Jim Prentice, and now Rachel Notley. Other provinces are following suit. I think Saskatchewan, as the judges said today, already has mandatory the study of the treaties in their public schools. We met with the Premier of Ontario, and she is in agreement to work towards that. I met with someone in the Premier's office here the other day to talk about that, to set up a meeting with the Premier of New Brunswick. We've talked to the Premier of Quebec about it. We've met with the Premier of Manitoba about it. In order to have reconciliation, in order to have improved relations between people, you have to know one another. You have to know one another. And what faster way, what better way than to not forget about the old people, the grandparents, and the present parents, but to focus on the children. They're the ones that are going to change things. I remember years ago, my in-laws came to Yellowknife. And they were visiting. And one day my daughter, who was around 10, came home from school, and so they were trying to make conversation. And this was in the early 90s. So they said, so Kyla, what did you learn today? She said, kind of distracted, she said, oh, we're just learning about holes. So her grandfather said, oh, you mean like a hole in your socks? Hole in the box? No, Grandpa. She said, you know, like hole in the ozone? Black holes? You know. Oh, he said, okay. And later he came and he said, what the hell is an ozone? And what the hell is a black hole anyway? And you realize what a big gap there is in the difference between people and their children. Never again are people going to be ignorant, unable to realize what it is we're talking about. Paul Martin, Joe Clark saying, why didn't we know about residential schools? We didn't know a damn thing about it. This just came out in the 90s. My wife didn't know about it. She knew I went to residential school, but it wasn't until 1998 that I finally said and told her what happened to me. Just we're not talking about it. It was a horrible secret. Nobody wants to talk about being sexually abused. Nobody wants to talk about why you were beaten. Because you actually thought, you know, God hates you so much, and you were such a bad kid that nuns were beating you. It's all captured in the mind, at least in my sense of being a 9-year-old. I went through my life, I like to think, doing great things. I got the idea about inviting Pope John Paul to the Northwest Territories. Couldn't pull it off the first time. Tried a second time and got him to actually come back a second time. And he had a good visit with us in 1987. When the animal rights movement hit our communities and devastated the fur prices and destroyed our economy, I called on people across the country. And together with indigenous leaders in Alaska, Greenland, Northern Quebec, Nunavut, Yukon, Northwest Territories, we worked together for 10 years fighting the animal rights movement with an organization called Indigenous Survival International. There was a lot of things done. There's many examples about the things that are good that should be done all over Canada. The government of Northwest Territories, for instance, has agreed to share the revenue from resources with the indigenous governments in the Northwest Territories. Can it be done in Ontario? Can it be done in New Brunswick? I like to think so. So we'll look for the examples of where things have happened that it should happen all across Canada. And that's what we are going to try to do as Canadians for a New Partnership. It's not always going to be easy, but I'll tell you one thing. The good news is it's never going to be as bad as it was in the past. People now know, and they will realize in greater numbers, that Canada for 150 years had a law that made it legal for them to go into our houses to take away our children for up to 10 years at a time. And that hundreds of thousands of us went through that. And that there's still a generation of us still alive. And that it has impacted our families, our communities, and now our children. that I came to the realization of how angry I was that my own son was afraid of me. And that my daughters, when they were very young, already knew that every time I saw nuns in habits, that I got into a rage, and they could see that. And they'd be with me at airports and wherever we were, and they'd say, "Dad, it's okay. Don't look at them." They knew there were some things that were not right about the way I was around certain people. In Yellowknife, it's a city for us, 20,000 people. I think it's huge. I was going to say, before you all came in, to the 15 people that were here, this reminds me of home. Beautiful and sparsely populated. The young leaders that are emerging back home are not on the reserves. They're not in the communities. Many of them are in the cities. And in Yellowknife, for instance, my daughters are growing up with other indigenous leaders from Nunavut, from Alberta, from the different regions. It would be Gwich'in, Sahtu, Dehcho, Akecho, Métis. And they have band together and said, "We are a community. We are friends. We are growing up together. We're raising our children here. We want to work together to create our own community in this city. And we'll work, find the tools, work with elders to relearn our language, to learn how to tend moose hide, to make drums, to learn the songs and the legends of our people. The things that parents like me were not able to provide to them. They're reaching out to do that. And it's a beautiful thing. And I think those are the kind of things that we need to share with each other, because I don't know what it's like to grow up in a city. But my children do. At least they think it's a city. The mayor of Edmonton is committed to reconciliation. The mayor of Vancouver is committed to reconciliation. Mayor of Calgary, the mayor of Winnipeg. So there is a movement. There is a movement. And I know we're all kind of down on Canada, but I try not to be, you know. The UN Declaration on Indigenous People was negotiated over 20 years. And I say, great, Canada signed. And somebody's going to say, yeah, last country in the world to sign it. But they signed it, you know. Things are a lot better than they were when I was growing up. I remember 1960, the big deal. We got a right to vote. I remember that. I was 9 years old. And yet there was a big thing made of that. What is there out there? You know, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court last spring said, didn't have to say anything. She gave a speech and she said, in her view, what happened to the indigenous people of this country is nothing short of cultural genocide. You know, when I see things like that, and I remember coming to Fredericton and Halifax back in 1975 and 76, trying to get people, Canadians, to come and listen to us and support us in our fight against the pipeline, trying to fight for recognition that we are a people, that we are the Dene Nation. That very few people used to show up, and there was no movement. There was nothing happening. You know, you look at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You look at the churches. You look at all the premiers met last summer and said, we support the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and all those recommendations. And I sort of look at all that and I think, this is great. So a hell of a lot more happened in the last few years than happened in the early years when I was running around this country. The universities are getting engaged. You know, university in Winnipeg, University of Manitoba said last spring, they're making it mandatory that for anybody to graduate from their university has to have at least one course about Native people. So as I say, there is movement, and it makes you feel good. On the other hand, you could see what's happening with Donald Trump and you think, my God, it's a nightmare. And you look at the politics in Canada, where people were appealing to the most base parts of humanity, trying to divide people, make people afraid of each other. And I'm one of the first ones to be afraid, because I know on a bus, on a plane, on a train, I stand out like a sore thumb. I don't pretend, hey, I blend in, you know. I never have, and I probably never will. It's not actually so bad now, but there was a time when there was hardly any other people from different parts of the world as there are now. So I want to thank you for inviting me here. As I said, I've learned many things in my time, and the biggest one is that I have to work at reconciliation. It starts with me. As a premier, I talked about it. As a minister, I talked about it. As a minister of education, I changed the curriculum in the Northwest Territories to include the study on residential schools. But I did not get into the business of forgiving. And you can imagine, the day I forgave, what a huge amount of rage and anger and hate just disappeared from this earth. And if 5 of us did it, 10 of us, 20 of us, 30 of us did it, just imagine what it would be like to be on our reserves and our communities and our families, sitting around together without anybody getting mad, getting angry. Where instead there's more humor and compassion. And just being able, as I'm learning at my late age, how to sit with mother and talk to her. How to spend time with my younger brother for the first time in my life. That because I did not give up on him, that he's now sober on October the 23rd for 2 years. That it starts with us. The government, the cities, the mayors, you know, we're out there raging at them and saying, you got to do this, got to do that, that's fine. But we also have some work to do, and that is my message to you, that I cannot talk about that unless I do it first, and it's tough work, you know. So far I'm working with my children on the forgiveness, the peace, and the compassion. Get rid of the rage, I can't. But I know my children, they don't have what I have. Because there was no violence, there's no swearing, there's no raging in my family. My wife would not allow it. And it's one of the few things that I did was different. There was no violence in my family in my marriage and my kids, there's no violence. The other thing is, without a spiritual base, without reaching back to the land, to the culture, to the teachings, that we are empty people. As one elder said to me, in this Bible of the prodigal son, you are the good son who worked the father's fields. You have no compassion, you have no heart, you're just a machine trying to make houses better for people, trying to make good government programs, but you have no love, no compassion. And you have to learn what that means. It took me 15 years to realize what that elder meant. And that's what I think our work is, as Canadians for a New Partnership, to show the way, the leadership that we need, so that the chiefs, members of the legislature, our caregivers, our elders included, all get into the healing, the forgiveness, so that we become stronger, with or without Canada. And even if the governments do not cooperate and do the things we want them to do, we should strive to be stronger. Because that's really what it's all about, and to be happy. And it was once said of me, the man who learned how to smile. As for the 16 years I was in the legislature, there's not one picture of me with a smile on my face. I just learned how to do that after I left. So those of you that have aspirations to be in politics and public life, don't let me discourage you. But thank you. I'm starting to ramble. As I said, I'm tired. I'm happy to be here. And forgiveness makes me happy, makes me feel stronger, makes me free. As an elder said, my happiness is my revenge. Thank you very much. Merci.
Thank you very much, Stephen. We're going to open it up to the audience for questions.
We called it Canadians for a New Partnership. Well, I'm Dene. I'm from the Northwest Territories. And there we have a lot of small communities, very isolated. You fly in or fly out. There's no roads. There's minimal service. But we learned a long time ago that in order to survive, we have to come together. And that was the magic of what happened in the 70s. When we were faced with a pipeline, 33 communities got together and we said, we're a nation. It is like a time of war. We have to come together in order to survive. And we were the first people in Canada to make that declaration. We're not a band. We're not a tribe. We're a nation. Our own land, our own culture, our own government. And that was the magic of it. And I think we need to move people towards the fact that following the elders, and I think with the strength of the women, it's often all it takes with some young people to break the deadlock that often tribal leaders, chiefs have that prevents us from coming together.
Were you endangered by shell companies that were trying to force you north?
Well, we come from the Northwest Territories. The Mackenzie Valley, there's a river that runs from Alberta, goes into the southern part of the Northwest Territories, right through to the Arctic Ocean. And we live mostly along that river. In 1974, there was a proposal to build a gas pipeline from Alaska all the way over the top of the Yukon, down the Mackenzie Valley into Alberta and into the United States. We said we would not be able to survive. 80% of our people were still hunting and trapping that time. Our chiefs had no offices, no telephone, no staff. We were economically independent and totally dependent on hunting and trapping. We didn't even have a bank account. So if a pipeline company said, hey, we'll give you $2 million, just let us put that pipeline through the valley. Even if we wanted to take the check, we wouldn't have had a place to put it. I mean, that's how unprepared we were, and it was our assessment that we would not survive. And that's why we put up such a fight. And we said, our plan, it doesn't include a pipeline. Our plan is us setting up our own schools, setting up our own governments, taking control back from our communities. It's about managing our own wildlife, taking care of our water, taking ownership of huge tracts of our land. It's about getting some of our leaders to run to the legislature and get elected so that they could be ministers and premiers of this government that was imposed on us from the outside. It's about getting a member of parliament. It's about putting somebody in the Senate. So when the chiefs asked to meet with the government, somebody like myself would end up sitting on the other side. And they would say, we asked you to be there so we could meet with you now. This is the kind of things we want to talk about. We did that. Some of us thought it was crazy. Some of us thought it couldn't happen. We made it happen. And today, there is incredible achievements in the Northwest Territories. As I said, revenue sharing. It's the only jurisdiction in Canada where revenue from resource development is shared with the indigenous governments of this country. We were the first jurisdiction to change the curriculum in the public schools to include and make it mandatory so that every child in the Northwest Territories had to study the history and culture of indigenous people in residential schools in order to graduate. We have land use planning regimes that are decision-making, legally binding. We have water boards that regulate the use of water. We have environmental boards, wildlife boards that manage. Real decision-making bodies. We haven't done everything right, but we've done a great many things that hasn't been done anywhere else. And I think the secret has been to set aside our differences enough to get together to deal with issues. That's been the secret. And that when we failed to do that, like everywhere else, we just fell apart.
The reason why I'm asking that is because we're presently going through an earthquake right now in our community, and I'm definitely against it, but people are for it. Some people are for it because of well, the poverty and lack of jobs, and which is a trick, which I
Well, thank you. I don't know enough about your community and situation to comment on it. All I know is that the strongest way you can approach it is always to base it on the treaty. That you're not a lesser people. You're not beholden or subject to anybody else. You're equal, and that's what the treaty gives you. As long as you stand on that, it creates the right mentality. Having said that, it's also no way to survive, to be a small community by yourself, trying to negotiate with companies, with governments. It is very, very difficult to do that. That at best, you'd end up with a little municipal government with some cash, a little bit of contracts here to deal with it. You know, I mean, if you limit it, you probably could make some benefits out of it, but without giving up any of your rights or compressing any of your rights in order to make those deals. Thank you.
As you might have heard through today's discussion and possibly last night, is that here in the Roswell territory and the Wabanaki Confederacy, it was the 5 nations who signed treaties with the traditional white chiefs, they call them. In the garden of sister
Yeah, well, thank you. Like I said, I don't know enough to comment, but I know reaching out to the youth, reaching out to allies, to groups is the way to go. You should not be alone. If anything, I'm trying to give you a message. We were pretty well alone in 1975, but we went across Canada and we spent weeks at it, talking at universities, church basements, and we got sufficient movement across Canada so that group after group, when the Berger inquiry moved across Canada, spoke up in support of the delineation against the pipeline. The issue of fracking is very controversial. I personally, and many of our people, do not want it, but it's difficult to fight, and it's a fight that must be done. Pipelines are the same thing. You got to make sure they're safe, they're done properly, and you have full say in whether you want it or not. Mines are the same thing. So one of the things I will do before I leave here is those of you that want cards, I don't probably have enough for all of you, but I can give you business cards so you know how to get a hold of me. We can put you in contact with people that can address the issues and concerns that you have so that we'll build alliances. It's easier now. Again, what a change, eh? Back in the 70s, people weren't sitting by the phone, you couldn't reach them. There's no way to get a message. You have to send a telex. Yeah, now, everybody's got it there all day. Can't talk to anybody, everybody's busy, Yeah. So it's closer, and there's a reason, I guess, why I came this far. I mean, I am tired. I'd like to go home and see my children, my grandchildren, but this is important, If I don't make it important, then why would I expect anybody else to do that? And so that's why I'm here. And I don't want to say, okay, I'm done, like, let me go. I'll give you cards. I brought some somewhere on the table there, so you can find a way to reach me. I can line you up with people that can help you to address the issues, do research, mobilize support, bring people to your community so you have people that speak up. I'm sorry. Yep, done.
You speak of the importance of building plans, and I certainly don't have the profile or capacity to speak of Kakfwi, but I believe each of us here has challenges, and I'm wondering what we can all do to demonstrate our support for Canadians for Partnership for the project for this nation, for the importance we attach to it. And I'm thinking especially with those of us who, if I may be ever so slightly brief for our commonly known on the prairies as Moonians, life those like this out. What can we do to help build, to be allies?
Well, thank you. It's almost like I press a prompter. There is a website. There's a website. If you Google Canadians for New Partnership, a website is going to pop up, and there's a declaration. There's a declaration that says we, the undersigned, support the notion that the relations between Canadians and Indigenous people of this country must improve, it will improve, and we support that. So you can sign the declaration. Last time I gave a talk in Toronto, I think, it jumped by 300. So the people that I work with said, hey, you must have gave a really good talk. So let them know I gave a really good talk, okay? And please Google and sign up. We appreciate your support. So thank you for the question. Cuddy, I want to do something before I sign off, so is that it for questions? Thank you. I'm going to do a song because it's never been done here, I know. And it's a Dene song, and it's called Yak Egot Ine. And it is it's a prayer song. We start our day, we start everything with it, and we end with it to thank the Creator. So we call Yak Egot Ine, the ancestors, the people in the spirit world, Yak Egot Ine. And so I will do this song with you to thank you and to call for blessings for us. Yak Egot Ine, 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 Yak Egot Ine. Merci. Sagot ina. Thank you. Yep.
On behalf of the University of New Brunswick, the Mi'kmaq Wolastoqey Center, and our organizing committee, I'd like to thank Stephen for sharing his stories, his views, and his wisdom. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Merci.
Well, Ewan, thank you very much for your journey, and we appreciate all your stories. That concludes our presentations for today, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to do a closing ceremonies. Elder Imelda Purley will do that in just a few minutes. Just a note for tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, the 7 a.m. sunrise ceremony at the Delta Hotel, and then we'll reconvene here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with the opening ceremonies, and of course we'll start reading with our morning speaker, the Chair of the Native Studies in St. Thomas University, the former Lieutenant Governor of New Brunswick, Greta Nicholas. I'm just now going to close this evening to turn it over to Elder Imelda Purley.
Ktachulas weltamoti bemkiskak, tanagud nudemek bemkiskak, tanagud achui tbida hademek, naga ktachibilinimitunen achui alokadiak, uma kazima alokadi mandalawitski up kaziskuidik. Was weltamotinicho nahat at lausel dated, was his wool dated, edgy wulmumkak, nidizabona kapch. Knam kamiptunen, gadiskuidmek, aliptueg, gluzwagen, psiwigenit zabano kazimawi bunmenen, naga apchknamidultinen. I just wanted to bring blessings from the Sweat Lodge that the young people are hosting in our community at Zidansisk. Very beautiful, powerful, and that's why I wanted to hug you from the lodge, because I just came from that lodge. And it was just so wonderful to see the balance of the males and the females and the young people and the elders and just really wonderful. And so what we do each day at the end is we have a ceremony where before we go to bed and we take off our shoes and before you lift your feet up onto your bed, we touch the right part of our foot and we say, thank you, grandfathers, for the places I've been today. And I give gratitude for that. Then we pat the left foot. Thank you, grandmothers, for teaching me that patience, that forgiveness, as was mentioned by our speaker, that love. And then we put our feet in bed and we give gratitude for the day that was gifted us. Tomorrow morning, we have an opportunity to do the same thing before your feet hit the floor. Thank you for my purpose today. Thank you for where I will be going today in my earth walk. And so that's what we do when we do these ceremonies. So tomorrow's ceremony, I know it was on the schedule for 6, and the only reason I put it at 6 is because I know there's a presentation to be done. I didn't want anybody to miss anybody, but we're going to have it at 7 at the Delta by the river. And it's an opportunity for visitors, and even for those of you who live here, to come and help us honor our great-grandmother Wolastuk, our beautiful and bountiful river. And there'll be a pipe ceremony shared there tomorrow by some of the pipe carriers, and there'll be some drumming, and then it starts the good day in a good way, especially next to our river. Our river needs our language. Our river needs those ceremonies. And when that river hears the original language of the land, and the ceremonies of the land, then we start feeling really good. Everybody feels good because that's how we honor water. That's why it rained today. In Moncton, it was just pouring crazy and stuff. And I texted the lodge, the guys doing the lodge, how bad is it in Fredericton? He goes, nothing here. It's okay, because it was pretty bad in Moncton. But Creator was just showing us the gifts. They'll never complain about our rain. Leewin, have a good night, rest, and hopefully see you in the morning. Leewin.